And I hope you had some delightful conversation there. I guess I should do a little, according to my buddy Steve, I should do a little correction of speech. He goes, do you know what a lewd is? I'm like, no, I don't know what a lewd is. He said, he goes, it was a pill. I was like, oh, well, there you go. But we didn't you ever say when you were in college, hey, man, take a lewd? They were taking a lewd, yeah. So anyways, if I offended you or spoke into your past, I apologize. That was my past, so I didn't know that lewd meant quaalude. I don't know what a quaalude is either, so that's so were there any questions that came up in your group that you want to have me jump into a little bit? Anything that you feel like we need to? Yes. All right, Bob, go ahead. What verse? Is it in the Bible? Yeah, many places. Where are we at? Chapter
4, verse 3, at the end.
Oh, the book of life.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So when I read that, who comes to mind? Jesus. Did you know that Jesus kind of scolded his disciples and said, da 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 da, you should be more concerned and be grateful that your names are written in the book of life. So the question comes up, what, Bob?
Well, our names are put in the book of life, even before we're born.
Yeah, Ephesians chapter 1, yeah.
Isn't there also a book called the Book of Life of the Lamb?
Book of Life of the Lamb. Don't know about that. Now, in Revelation, it talks about the opening the seal. The Lamb is the only one who can open the seal. And that's just speaking to but you'll have to, if you've got a specific reference here, but I think actually what Bob is kind of, if I could, have a little bit of liberty here, Bob has really kind of opened up the proverbial can of worms that could get us way into the deep philosophical conversation, and just to be a jerk, we might need lewds, whatever they are, but that's the conversation about predestination and about what is this book of life. And what I would suggest to you, how I teach people this, is that our names, we don't write our names in the book, right? It always says, be grateful that your names have been written. And so what Bob communicated, and that is that, in eternity, the names have been written in the book, right? So here's the $100 question. How do you know whether your name's in the book?
We know.
And you say, how do we know?
It's more like, how do we know it's still in the book?
How do we know it's still in the book of life?
By our faith, I guess.
By our faith, I guess. Well, this was the big Protestant debate. And so John Calvin, anybody know any good Dutch Reformed people, or were you raised, anybody have Reformed roots? So Calvin and Luther debated this one, and they came down on different sides. Calvin said, here's how you know you're in the book of life. Talk is cheap, show it me. You show your name is in the book by how you live. Luther said, no, John, you're going back to the law. And by the way, you're going back to works. John Calvin, very bright. I mean, Luther and Calvin are so close on so many things. But Luther said, how do you know? How do I know I'm in the book of life? I'm baptized. And then you say, well, what if I don't believe in my baptism? Oh. So, I don't know. If you have a child, And at times the child says, I don't want you as my mom. You think those things happen? You think sons say to their dad, I don't want you as my dad? Are you still a child, regardless of what you say? Surely, you are. Because the parent has given birth to you. Can you ultimately reject your parent? Can you ultimately, if you will, say, I will have nothing to do with you? Surely, you can. Luther would say this is why he says in what does your baptism mean? Now watch this. Baptism is God's bringing you into his family by grace through faith. The faith is not of yourselves. So what if someone is baptized and throws it all away? Luther would say their name isn't erased. It was never in the book of life. And so this is why we have to be careful. Did people reject the faith, if you will, leave? Absolutely. Why do you think Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan? But the story is really, the Good Samaritan, the waiting father, the prodigal son. The story is really more about the father and the older brother, the prodigal as well. That's a story. In real life, did somebody reject Jesus? Leave Jesus? His name's Peter. So how does this put us into the conversation in everyday life? Have there been times that you have walked away from the Lord? I can say, I have. Well, maybe. Maybe, I don't know. I can't say everyone. I can just say I have. And guess what? Ultimately, Luther would say, do I remember my baptism? Do I cherish my baptism? Am I grateful ultimately that I am the Lord's child? And I would say, yes. And so therefore, the book of life is kind of almost, I don't want to call it irrelevant. It's because we can't see. We can just be grateful that God has put us in it because of Jesus. And leave the rest of it up in the hands of the Lord. And what about people we talk to? Well, if it's all done deal, why do we even tell them about the gospel? Well, actually, that's really simple. We do it because God has told us to do it. And because we get the joy of watching people give confession of Christ, to have the opportunity to receive the blessing of Christ, and we get to partner in that. That would be like saying, the kid's going to be raised no matter what. Why should I be involved in this child's life? I look at Charlie, he's back. I can guarantee you there are children over at NOC that know you're back. And they're grateful you're back, right, Charlie? Yeah. So same thing could be said of Bob. And so what's the joy? Now are you starting to see his language? You are my joy, my crown. It's this relational side of it. So that's where we keep our focus on. We keep focus on what we're supposed to be doing. Leave the rest up to God. We can't convert anybody. We can't read anybody's heart. So at the end of the day, it's really outside of my ability to understand these things. But I can understand this. I'm called to love God, and I'm called to love people. I'm called to give a reason for the faith that I have, the hope I have, and do it with gentleness. Because this is the Christian life. Does that make sense? Yeah. But it's a great observation, and I probably, could have taken the time on it. I'm glad you brought it up as a question. Any other questions on this from this section? Chapter 4. No? Well, I wanted to, we've got just a few minutes. I'd like to. Again, I want you to notice how, again, if you are receiving a letter and you hear these words, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Now, verse 14, yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. And you, Philippians, yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, we just looked at it, Acts chapter 16, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you. Even in Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again. Now, if this is not a book of the Bible, doesn't this sound like a relational letter? Like a thank you note? Like something you would send to people, hey, I just wanted to tell you, I appreciate what you've done. Do you see the pattern, if you will, the example of what Christians are called to be doing? One of our members had given Mary and me a gift recently, and Mary, it's that husband-wife thing. You wrote the thank you note, didn't you? Well, I thought you wrote the thank you note. I didn't write the thank you note. I never write thank you notes. You write the thank you notes. I write thank you notes. What do you? Okay, so we need to write a thank you note. We want to write a thank you note, and then it's a. Do you have the address? I don't have the address. Do you have the address? I'm like, nobody sends letters anymore. I don't have an address. I'm like, take the note over to the police, for goodness sake. Not let's say, but look at all of this. Why do you send a note? Why do you send? Huh? Because you care. Because you don't want the person to think that this is just something that you take for granted. That it's something that you just are entitled to. Or when you say, I love the phrase, thank you. But it's different than thanks because of the you. Thank you is not just talking about the gift. It's talking about the giver. You see, thank you brings out that there's something going on. You and I just had a little conversation before you went off to your class, and you said to me, thank you for telling me that. That really helps me. Didn't you say that? Yeah. And when you said that, thank you, that's a relational thing. And this is what's going on. This is what Paul is modeling. Paul is modeling, I'm in prison, for goodness sake. I'm in Rome, very likely it was Rome. I am under house arrest, or however it is. I am chained to some sort of soldier. I can't even go to the bathroom without somebody right next to me. And you remembered me. But you've been doing that. You did that way long time ago when I was on my mission trip. Do you see the relational nature of this? I tell you this because, for goodness sake, churches are not necessarily families. We have all experienced it. And by the way, I would suggest to you, if you've lived in Europe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you go to a church in Europe, it is an individual activity. You go in, you sit down, you get up, you walk out, and you have now done church. Anybody experience that at a church? You experience it in a Catholic church your whole life. Okay. You were thinking, well, I could tell you could experience it in a Lutheran church, and you can experience it in a Baptist church and a Presbyterian church. This takes work. It takes people investing themselves in the lives of one another. And quite frankly, why do it? You know, I mean, really. If we want to find, why not find people of our own tribe? You know, the golfers, go with the golfers. The pickleball players, go with the pickleball players. The people that play bridge, or just do stuff with people that are like you. Church is different. Church is not about us. It's about the Lord who has brought us in his family. And you see how church can become messy, and yet it can become very beautiful. Pastor Jeff, soapbox. My brother and I talk every morning. Some of you know this. This morning, you know, he said, again, I appreciate you not going out and telling the world this. He said, well, we were both wrong. And we were both shocked. And obviously you may figure out what we're talking about. But he said these words. I got up this morning and told Gail, well, I looked outside. The sky is still there. The ground's underneath my feet. The earth's still spinning. Maybe what happened yesterday doesn't matter one way or another. I'm going to work. Now, that's a very oversimplification. Obviously. And by the way, if you turn on the TV or a late night show or whatever, you're going to hear all kinds of opinions from everybody. But at some level, we have got to recognize that the divisiveness in this country is foundationally tied to that we want to be around people who think the way we think, that act the way we act, that have the same things in common with us. And when we are willing to actually, again, treat each other with respect, that we are all human beings created equally by God, that we are all loved equally, and we can have our crazy opinions. And by the way, we can all tell each other we're crazy till the cows come home. But at the end of the day, ultimately, God sent his son for the whole world. And that's not just U.S. citizens. And so it's kind of a beautiful gift to be church. Because, you know, the Christian can find family with the rest of the family in Christ. And then we look to those that are not in the family with respect and love because they've been created by God. And so you see this real intimate relationship, and we show it through affection, through acts of kindness, through gifts, through investing ourselves in one another. And he goes on with that, and I'm going to have to roll here shortly, but notice how he talks about this whole business. We do all this because ultimately, again, I have learned to be content in all circumstances. That the Christian's job is to learn how to be content whatever the noise is around us. And that's not, for me, it takes work. It's not something that comes intrinsically easily, just to be content. I have to be willing to practice those things that Paul is talking about. Well, we're going to leave this letter behind. It's a cool letter because there's been all kind of speculation about the relationship between this Roman outpost, Philippi, and the Roman, right there, Caesar's household. It's just bizarre how many connections Paul is making in his letter. We're going to a letter that I would suggest does not have near the intimacy. It's an important letter in a different way, and it's the letter of Colossians. So next week, you're going to jump into Colossians, and we'll finish up our last third of the mile. Over the next few weeks, we'll finish off just after Thanksgiving. So let's close with the family prayer, shall we? Lord, remember us in your kingdom and teach us to pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever.